Welcome to the deep dive. We take source material, articles, research, notes, whatever you've got, and we really try to unpack it, find those key insights just for you.
Yeah, like a shortcut to getting the important stuff, maybe with a few, surprising stories thrown in.
Exactly. So today, we're diving into something that, well, touches every single one of us, managing our emotional lives. And our source material for this is from Kross's book, Shift, Managing Your Emotions So They Don't Manage You. Some really interesting excerpts there.
hmm And our mission really is to pull out the most powerful ideas from these pages. We want to help you understand how you can take a more active role with your emotions. Learning from some pretty surprising research and stories, Kross shares.
Because let's face it, emotions drive so much. I mean, huge achievements, tiny daily choices, our connections with people. The
Mhm.
book even points out when we think about legacy, it often comes down to how we made people feel, right?
Absolutely. They give life meaning, purpose, connection, all that important stuff.
And yet, and yet they can also feel like they're just running the show sometimes. Like we're being bounced around, maybe grabbing for quick fixes.
Yeah, like emotional band-aids.
Right. But what if we could actually learn to steer them, navigate them more skillfully? That's really the core question here.
And Kross starts by showing us, look, this struggle isn't new. People have been grappling with overwhelming feelings for, well, thousands of years. The book talks about some pretty extreme historical attempts to feel better, things like trepanation,
Hmm.
drilling holes in skulls thousands of years ago,
Wow.
and even lobotomies, much more recently, mid-20th century.
That really puts it in perspective how desperate people felt. And it's not just ancient history. The book mentions a study, I think it said nearly 40% of people surveyed.
Mhm.
They believed you actually cannot control your emotions, period.
Yeah, and that number, it might seem high, but you can see why people feel that way. A lot of our initial emotional reaction is automatic. Like
Hmm.
being startled, you jump before you think. Or those learned responses that just kick in. Or even physical stuff, like your heart pounding before a presentation. It just happens.
So that first jolt, that automatic thing from the trigger, you can't really stop that. The trigger happens, boom, body reacts.
Exactly. The event sets it off. The initial response is often unconscious. But, and this is the crucial bit Kross emphasizes, there's a point after that trigger. That's where control or maybe influence becomes possible. That's where we can step in.
Okay. And to even begin doing that, we need to kind of understand what emotions are. The book really pushes back on that whole good vibes only thing we see everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. It debunks that myth pretty hard. Trying to just force positivity can actually be harmful sometimes, especially if you're facing a problem you actually could fix. Just slapping a smile on it might stop you from taking action.
So negative emotions aren't inherently bad then. The source material really hammers this home. All emotions are functional. They evolved for a reason.
hmm They contain information. They help us navigate the world. Even the ones we don't like feeling are useful if they're in the right proportion.
Like fear signaling danger or anger pointing to a problem that needs fixing.
Exactly. They're signals, not just noise. Evolutionary pointers.
The problem comes, as the book points out, when they get out of whack. Felt too intensely, or they stick around way too long.
Right, like taking months to get over a backhanded compliment or totally losing it over a dirty dish.
Yeah.
That's when functional becomes, well, dysfunctional.
Okay. And this leads to maybe one of the most hopeful points in the book. Our ability to manage this stuff, it isn't fixed. It's malleable. We can actually learn and change it.
Yes, that's such a key takeaway. It's not set in stone.
There's this amazing longitudinal study mentioned. They tracked kids' emotion regulation skills from age 3 up to 11.
And the results were just,
Mm.
wow. Kids with better emotion regulation earlier on, they tended to have more advanced careers, more savings, better physical health, even slower biological aging later in life.
Lower aging, like brain and organs.
Yeah. And get this, it was more predictive for several of those outcomes than things like socioeconomic status or even IQ.
That's huge. It really shows how foundational this skill is, maybe more than we realize. And the fact that it's malleable.
That's the crucial part. The book uses this great analogy. We're born with the emotional apparatus, the hardware, but most of us aren't really taught how to play it skillfully.
Like having a fancy instrument, but no lessons.
Exactly. But we can learn. And Kross introduces this idea of shifters.
Shifters.
Yeah, powerful tools, basically neural systems we already have, that let us adjust our emotions, how long they last, how intense they feel.
Okay, shifters. And there are two main types.
Right. The first category is shifting from the inside out, using tools within ourselves.
Right.
And the first of those internal shifters is our senses.
Our senses. Okay, how does that work?
Well, senses are incredibly primal.
Yeah.
They work fast, often bypassing all the complex thinking parts of the brain. Kross calls it a neural bullet train.
Neural bullet train, I like that. Quick
Okay.
impact.
Exactly. Think about simple stuff the book mentions.
Yeah.
Smelling a partner's t-shirt, reducing stress.
Here.
Or petting a dog, even hugging a teddy bear that can release oxytocin, dopamine, those feel-good chemicals.
Even just looking at nature, right? Helping
Oh.
hospital patients heal faster.
Mm-hmm. And the classic Proust effect, that sudden rush of memory and feeling from a taste or smell, like Proust's Madeleine cookie.
Mm-hmm.
Research shows deliberately using positive sensory stuff like that can actually lower stress.
And touch is super fast too, you said.
Within milliseconds, yeah. It's incredibly direct.
It feels powerful because it works even when your head's buzzing, right? Trying to logically argue yourself out of a bad mood is hard.
Yeah, it can be.
But putting on music you love or stepping outside for some sun that's
Mhm.
using a sensory shifter, maybe without even labeling it that way.
Totally. Now, there is a slight downside or a thing to watch out for: the emotional congruency effect.
Meaning?
Sometimes when we feel bad, we might unconsciously reach for sensory things that match that bad feeling, like listening to sad songs when you're heartbroken.
Oh, yeah. Wallowing.
Exactly. It's not always terrible for a bit, but you don't want to get stuck there, passively pulled down by it.
So the idea is to be more strategic. Kross suggests figuring out which senses pack the biggest positive punch for you, with the least sort of cost or downside.
Right. For him, sound and taste were big, but taste could lead to overeating. Music was lower cost, high impact for him.
And looking for sensory bundles, like cooking or gardening, things that hit multiple senses.
Yeah, exactly. Consciously using your senses is probably one of the easiest, most accessible ways to start shifting things.
Okay, cool. So from senses,
Mhm.
the next internal shifter is attention, where we point our focus.
Absolutely. Our ability to steer our attention towards stuff, away from stuff, including our own thoughts and feelings, that's a major lever.
And the big problem here is what Kross calls chatter, right? That negative loop in your head.
That repetitive worry or self-criticism. The book gives examples like Louisa terrified about her daughter's allergy, just playing worst-case scenarios over and over. Or Kross himself, after getting a threat letter, his mind just looping on it.
Your brain's trying to make sense of it, but it gets stuck.
Exactly. It hits a snag. And just trying harder to think positively about the problem isn't always the fix.
So this is where flexible attention deployment comes in. Being able to both engage with tough stuff when needed, but also strategically disengage or turn away when that's more helpful.
Right. It's about flexibility. There's some really compelling research here. The book mentions a 9/11 study.
Yeah.
It found the people who were most resilient 18 months later. They weren't the ones who only expressed emotions or only suppressed them. They were the ones best able to toggle between the two.
Ah, interesting. So flexibility was key.
Totally. The book gives examples like Dennis Rodman, the basketball player seemingly able to selectively tune out immense pressure. Or Kross's grandmother, a Holocaust survivor who was outwardly stoic but would selectively share her trauma with trusted people. That's flexible engagement.
So it challenges the idea that avoiding feelings is always bad.
Exactly. Chronic avoidance, like using it as your only tool, yeah, that's not healthy. But selective, strategic avoidance, that's actually part of resilience.
How do you know if it's unhealthy avoidance?
A big clue is if you're trying not to think about something, but you find yourself thinking about it constantly,
Yeah.
that's usually a sign the avoidance isn't really working.
Got it. So the capacity to flexibly deploy attention, lean in sometimes, step back, others, that's a key resilience indicator.
Definitely. And following attention, what we look at, comes perspective, which is about how we look at things.
Okay, so attention is the what, perspective is the how. And distress makes it hard to change perspective.
Yeah, it tends to narrow our focus right down. Kross mentions how linguistically, when people are really struggling, they often overuse I, me, my. It signals being really absorbed in that personal experience.
So how do you shift perspective then?
The main technique is gaining distance. The book uses a great analogy. Imagine you're swimming, trying to help kids who are struggling on the water. You need to hold them at arm's length, close enough to help, but far enough that they don't pull you under too. You engage, but with a bit of space.
Makes sense. And how do you create that distance mentally?
A few ways. Imagine you're a fly on the wall, just observing. Or, and this one's fascinating, use distanced self-talk.
Meaning, talk to yourself using you or your own name instead of I.
Exactly. So instead of thinking, I feel so overwhelmed, you'd think, okay, your name, you're feeling overwhelmed, what can you do? Or simply, you're feeling overwhelmed.
And that actually works.
The neuroscience is pretty cool here. Studies showed people using you, or their name, felt less negative emotion almost instantly.
Yeah.
And interestingly, it didn't seem to require more mental effort according to brain scans. It felt less effortful than typical I-focused self-talk.
Wow. Okay. What else for perspective?
Time travel. Mentally stepping back into the past or forward into the future. Our minds do this naturally for learning and planning, but we often get stuck replaying negative past events or worrying about the future. The skill is learning to time travel more effectively, using it to gain perspective on the present moment. How will I feel about this in a week, a year?
The book has some powerful examples of this, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. Jerry Linenger on the Mir space station during that fire?
The open window thought?
Exactly. That absurd thought momentarily breaks the panic, provides a jarring shift in perspective. Or Vic Stretcher, after losing his daughter, having that profound moment kayaking, feeling like he heard her say, "Get over it, Dad."
Seeing his own grief from a different angle?
And Paul Kalanithi, facing his terminal diagnosis, reframing it as a gift that allowed him a unique understanding of life and death. It shows how perspective isn't just about feeling better. It can be about finding meaning, even in terrible circumstances.
That's a possibility of downshifting the intensity just by changing how you look at it.
Wow.
That feels really powerful.
It really is. So those are the internal shifters. Sensory, attention, perspective. But like you said earlier, we don't live in a bubble.
Right. The world around us plays a huge role. Which brings us to the external shifters.
Exactly. The spaces we're in, the people we interact with, the cultures we're part of. These don't just affect us directly. They can also trigger or support our internal shifters.
Okay, so the first external one is environment, our physical surroundings.
Yep. And it works in pretty straightforward ways sometimes, like Kross literally removing leftover pizza from his site because it was triggering unwanted feelings, taking away a negative cue.
Or adding a positive one, like that study where just looking at a photo of your mom could buffer emotional pain.
Right? Adding something soothing or positive to your environment. Sometimes a change of scenery itself helps shift perspective too. Like Laurie Santos feeling stuck at Yale and moving to Cambridge for a bit gave her the distance to see things differently.
Or Sean, who found that going back to a meaningful place, the beach near his childhood home, acted as a powerful emotional reset during a tough time. The environment itself was resonant.
So the takeaway is kind of doing a spaces audit, looking around your home, your workspace. How did these places make you feel?
Yeah, and can you curate them a bit? Remove stuff, add stuff. It's acknowledging that our surroundings aren't neutral. They're an active part of our emotional regulation system.
Next up, relationships. Kross says emotions are contagious, like a virus.
Which can be good or bad, I guess.
Both. But crucially, other people help us regulate in two main ways. First, they offer empathy and validation. Just feeling heard and understood is huge.
Definitely.
And second, they help shift our perspective. They offer a fresh pair of eyes when we're stuck in our own viewpoint.
But you need both, right? The book warns about co-rumination.
Yeah, just endlessly rehashing the problem with someone without ever getting to that perspective shift. The ideal is get it out, feel validated, then use their viewpoint to help you reframe or find solutions.
Okay, balance is key. The book also mentions social comparison. We all do it, compare ourselves to others, usually seen as negative, thief of joy, and all that.
Right, but Kross suggests it's natural, and it can sometimes be used positively for inspiration, learning, seeing possibilities. Depends how you frame it.
And there's that interesting finding about helping others. It actually helps us feel better.
Yeah, spending money on others versus yourself, or acts of altruism, they reliably boost happiness. Helping is its own kind of emotional shifter.
So relationships are these deep currents. Understanding contagion, seeking both validation and perspective, comparing wisely, helping others. Lots of levers there.
Definitely. And the final external shifter, maybe the biggest one of all, is culture.
Kross calls it the most profound, foundational one.
Yeah, because it shapes pretty much everything what we think, how we act, and crucially, how we manage emotions. It's defined practically as the ideas and practices passed down, beliefs, values, norms, rituals.
The book gives that stark contrast. Kross's own childhood culture, where maybe fighting back was expected, versus the Utku Inuit culture, where expressing anger was basically taboo because cooperation was so vital for survival, shows how deeply culture shapes emotional expression.
Exactly. And religion is brought up as a powerful cultural system, often rich with emotion regulation tools.
Like belief in a higher power offering perspective, practices like prayer or gratitude, focusing on acceptance.
Right. All those components can help people feel grounded. Now, cultures can be healthy resources, or they can be sources of stress. The book suggests ways to lean into healthy ones or change unhealthy ones using 3 rules.
Okay, what are the rules?
First, check the foundation. What are the core beliefs and values driving things? Think of corporate turnarounds, like Uber needing to shift toxic underlying values.
Right. Second.
Rethink norms. What are the shared expectations for behavior? Google's big study on teams found psychological safety, feeling safe to be vulnerable, was the most important norm for success.
Okay. Foundation, norms. Third.
Customize practices. Create rituals and routines that help people cope and reinforce the good values and norms. Like the English Football Association, working to build psychological resilience through practices fostering care and trust.
So culture is like this master switch influencing everything. Understanding its parts, beliefs, norms, practices helps you see how it's shaping you and maybe how you can shape it.
Exactly. So we've got these 6 shifters: sensory, attention, perspective internally, environment, relationships, culture externally. Powerful tools. But here's a rub. Kross addresses.
And no undoing gap.
Precisely. We often know this stuff intellectually. Yeah, I should take deep breaths. I should talk to someone. But in the heat of the moment, when you're actually in that emotional funk,
You just don't do it. Yeah,
Yeah.
we've all been there. Why weren't we taught this stuff earlier? And how do we actually use the tools when we need them?
the key, Kross argues, is making the use of these shifters more automatic, or at least having plans ready before the emotion hits.
Like pre-planning your reaction?
Kind of. He talks about the if-then planning strategy, like the Navy
Oh,
SEALs.
yeah, the training example.
For every potential if scenario, like glass shattering during entry, they drilled multiple then responses. It trains an automatic reaction under pressure, bypassing that freeze moment.
So for emotions, it'd be like, if I start feeling overwhelmed by emails,
Then I will stand up and walk around the room for 2 minutes. You create that automatic link beforehand. Kross also mentions Gabriel Oettingen's WOOP framework.
whoop, what's that?
Wish, outcome, obstacle, plan. You identify your wish, visualize the positive outcome, realistically identify the main obstacle in your way, and then make an if-then plan to deal with that obstacle.
Okay, wish, outcome, obstacle, plan.
And the key is linking the positive fantasy outcome with the reality check, obstacle, and the concrete plan. That combination, research shows, makes you much more likely to achieve goals and navigate the emotional bumps along the way.
So planning ahead, whether it's simple if-thens or something like Whoop, makes it easier to actually use these shifters when you need them most. Bridges that gap.
Exactly. It helps move from just knowing to actually doing.
Got it. So one final big message from the book seems to be about personalization, right?
Absolutely crucial. Kross really emphasizes there's no single magic bullet here. Emotion regulation is super idiosyncratic. What works wonders for one person might do nothing for another. His grandmother's toolkit, forged in trauma, was different from his own, and yours will be different again.
And that's actually empowering, isn't it? Knowing about these 6 general shifters: sensory, attention, perspective, environment, relationships, culture, gives you a framework.
Yeah, a menu to choose from. You can explore, experiment, figure out which tools resonate most strongly for you.
Kross uses his own reaction to that school shooting threat near his home as a final example, right?
Yeah.
Combining multiple shifters.
He consciously reframed things, managed his attention, changed his environment by going for a walk, talked to friends for perspective, focused on caring for his family.
So it wasn't one technique, but drawing on a collection of tools that worked for him then.
Precisely. And that's the core idea the source material leaves us with. This is a skill. It's learnable. It's malleable. You have these powerful internal and external shifters available, or you can cultivate them.
This has been really illuminating, a great deep dive. The main takeaway feels clear. We have these powerful shifters, internal and external, ready to be used more skillfully.
We really hope you, listening, take a moment to think about your own emotional toolkit. Which of these shifters, sensory, attention, perspective, environment, relationships, culture, feel most natural or potent for you? Where might you already be using them? And where could you be maybe a bit more intentional?
And maybe a final thought to chew on. Could you pick just one small, intentional way to use a sensory shifter today? Or I'd try to get a little distance on one nagging thought using perspective. Maybe tweak one small thing in your environment. Or reach out to someone specifically for their perspective, not just to vent.
Yeah, or thinking about those common triggers.
Yeah.
What's just one simple if-then plan you could make right now, just to have it ready for next time? Small steps.
Lots to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.